Through the misty morning fog, Timothy Wimbledon could indistinctly see the flags flying on top of the city wall. He raised his telescope, trying to make out the command on the flags. Most of the flags were green, each embroidered with a sailing ship and a crown on it. Undoubtedly, they belonged to his sister, Garcia Wimbledon. The second most seen flag was a white flag, with a high tower which had a viper wrapped around it, and this belonged to the House Balliol. "Ha!" he sneered in his heart. "Earl Balliol, how shameless of you to keep your flag flying high after surrendering to the Queen of Clearwater. I'll feed you your flags as soon as you fall into my hands, traitor." The least flown flag was red, and it was embroidered with a high tower and a lion. This flag belonged to House Zitter, who was just as shameless as the rest. Timothy showed no external emotion, even though in his heart he had already sentenced Aaron Zitter, Antoman Balliol, to death. Of course, Aaron Zitter also had to eat his flags. "Their name, raise the flags of the Kingdom of Greycastle," Timothy commanded. "Yes, Your Majesty," Frostwind Knight replied before galloping off to tell the army behind him. The king orders to raise the flags. The new king turned his head and watched as one by one, the grey flags were being raised, flying high in the wind. The image was a black pattern depicting a huge tower with ink lining and intercrossed spears on both sides, making the flag look solemn. This was the emblem for the King of Greycastle, and any traitor would be beheaded before it. As soon as news of the independence of Garcia reached his ears, he took immediate action by mobilizing the troops of the Eastern region and the King's City and then marching on Eagle City. Although in his heart he was terrified, he had maintained a calm face, giving the ministers who stood by his side a boost of confidence. It took almost a month to summon the landowners and troops, and then a week on the road to the Eastern region, followed by half a month to reach here. Yesterday, Timothy finally arrived at Eagle City at sunset. Fortunately, the months of demons did not affect the King's City much, therefore, the road in the Southern Territory was not hindered by snow. Instead, the frozen ground made the carts of food move even faster. His army was quite large and mainly comprised of his own guards, the knightage of the King's City, and the troops of Duke Francis Clare of the Eastern region. The three groups totaled to over 6,000 men, and up to 1,000 of them were well-trained and armed knights. According to a reliable source, Garcia had no more than 3,000 men, most of whom were the freemen of Port of Clearwater. They might be qualified enough to plunder unarmed farmers or merchants, but they would never stand a chance against the knights. Gord, his treasurer, had advised that it was not a good time to call the army after the end of the months of demons, because the farming in each land would start soon, and the lack of men would harm the harvest. Timothy took the advice. He allowed his landowners to keep their serfs and called the freemen on his land to take on the job of logistics and transportation. This way the spring farming would still take place even while they were fighting in the Southern Territory. In any case, Timothy Wimbledon would never allow Garcia to stay in the Southern Territory. Eagle City, which was not as stoutly built, had been designated a trade market, situated in the middle of the peripheral towns. As time went on, the market grew into a young city with a history of less than a century. Furthermore, the previous lords intentionally left out the construction of a defensible wall to give the impression of a trade city. Garcia's army that totaled 3,000 civilians and the men from the two earls was not large or strong in Timothy's view. Accordingly, the quicker they reacted, the more of a chance they stood. If he offered Garcia enough time to organize the entire Southern Territory, she would be more difficult to defeat. After a good night's rest and full bellies, his troops were ready for war. As the sun rose, changing from a bright orange into a radiating gold, the mist dissipated and the brown wall was revealed. This was not a wall but more of a bare soil slope, in the new king's opinion. The incline made the slope easy to climb with just bare hands and feet. There was no need for ladders. On the top of the slope stood wooden bars, all the height of the men. While this might deter the refugees and thieves, it would not stop the trained soldiers. The men guarding this wall were scattered and obviously not ready to defend the city. Your Majesty, the scout on the south gate reported that a large party is on the move. Frostwind Knight rode to the new king, and he reined in his horse to make his report. Timothy handed his telescope over to Duke Francis and said in a relaxed voice, "It seems she intends to run away." The Duke watched the city for a while before nodding. She made a bold decision quickly. "We'll take them all if she plans on putting her men in Eagle City. She won't be able to defend herself there for very long." As the Duke said this, he laughed. "As you predicted at the council meeting last night, our quick response caught her off guard." "We've arrived at the right time," Timothy said. "She couldn't slip away at night even if she intended to." "Exactly, to march the army at night would be taboo. If she does decide to move at night, her army will be scattered even if we don't attack. It's impossible to gather your men once they have scattered in darkness. Thus, she's still doomed even if she does make it back to Port of Clearwater. So, my dear sister has to wait until the break of dawn to retreat with the army." Timothy looked at Eagle City. It was finally within his grasp. Filled with satisfaction, he believed his sister had done exactly as he had expected. Garcia had set up her army in Eagle City, a place she had desired for a long time. Strategically, seizing the house from the previous wards of the Southern Territory provided an advantage and allowed one to buy the loyalty of the noble in the South. And yet the crisis came with it. Thinking ahead, he had deployed a decoy army to draw attention, while he secretly led the riders to the eastern region in advance. This left behind the infantries, but allowed carts to secretly carry the war supply. After the decoy army had entered the eastern region, the Duke would contribute to the troops to reinforce them. Then he would lead the march on Eagle City through the other side of the kingdom. As they moved forward, the riders would run ahead to block the road, in order to reduce the possibility of any information leaking from spies. Garcia might have received the rough news 2 or 3 days before she decided to retreat her army at dawn, which was a hasty march since there was no time for preparation. They would have to walk for a day to get from Eagle City to the town of Clear Spring, and even so, they could never outpace his riders. As long as he rallied 1,000 riders to chase after her and pick off the enemy from behind, her funny coalition would automatically collapse. It was a pity that Garcia could still escape if she abandoned her 3,000 men and fled alone. If she did that, it would be easy for her to reach Port of Clearwater alive. He thought that hunting her down in her lair would end the farce. "Your Majesty, do we split up according to the plan?" Duke Francis said. "Do you intend to cross the city at the south gate and start the chase after I break into the city? Or will you take a detour that'll add time?" "I think it's better to take the detour to the southwest." Timothy pondered for a while. The narrow street would be inconvenient, and furthermore, Garcia might block the street with junk to hinder the riding troops. A detour, while it might cost us 2 extra hours, won't affect the pursuit of the enemy. "Then it's time for me to set out, Your Majesty." "Be careful," Timothy warned him. "Garcia may not have left many of her troop behind in the city, but I assume there will be lots of traps. Moreover, be aware of the narrow streets or any place crowded with houses. This is where ambushes from Garcia's loyal men are likely to take place." "Ha ha ha." Duke Francis laughed brightly. "Please, trust me, Your Majesty. Since the wound I received from following your father into battle, I haven't sustained one since. And I have single-handedly beheaded hundreds of men." He waved his hand to the guards beside him. "Blow the horn and begin the attack." The army behind him started to surge, with some of the platoons moving out of formation. Led by knights, they marched towards Eagle City. They were the vanguards, made up of civilians. They were followed by armored mercenaries, which were the main force of the siege. At the same time, the riders brought by the Duke all rallied under his banner. Timothy waited until the main army had attacked the wall before leading the rest of the knights and squires southwest.